I had stumbled across a quote from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. It's something that I said. It's interesting. I forget where I got it from. I saw it in the last week or so. It says, uh, "Art is useless from a physical sense." Well, that's what he's saying. I think there was a long quote, but I've often said that too, and it's interesting. Just I came across that with it. I don't know where maybe well, I don't remember where I got that, but um, anyway.
Yeah, several of the things that you say, like the term philosophical zombies, a few things from Carl Sagan. Future generations will probably read them and think that you came up with them, just like they think Shakespeare invented certain words. But
Mm.
they're really just things that have fallen out of the popular culture. Philosophical zombies was just a much more common term decades ago, but now has kind of fallen out until you
Well,
reinvented
that's
it.
a good example. Not only that, but turns of phrases. I use a lot of phrases in Vincetti Brothers and in True Life that people would think that I'm just making them up, but they're not. But they've totally forgotten. And you can look at even online at things like the Urban Dictionary, and they're not there. And so people who think that they're being genuine about something, no, you can't just use an Urban Dictionary to get that. A good example is a phrase when someone says, uh, I don't know if I use it in True Life, but I've used it a few times in certain books. Where don't big boy me. To big boy means basically don't dick wave at me. But that's a phrase that's gone totally out of the vernacular.
Also, playing the dozens. Now, this is a
Yeah,
term I was actually familiar with from my parents.
yeah.
Playing the dozens,
Doing the
going.
dozens.
Yes, well, playing the dozens too is a popular term that means basically the same thing.
Okay.
Maybe it's a Canadian thing,
Yeah.
but doing the dozens, playing the dozens, these are ones that probably will people come across and think, well, he's just making it up. But it's good how you kind of show how culture is kind of these phrases have fallen out and how language evolves in that way.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons that I've talked about this, and this is why I don't try to take credit for things that I didn't do. I don't want give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is God. Someone said that once too. I think that was in Godspell that they said that. It's a quote from someone else, but render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. I guess it's from the Bible, but the the thing is, you know, when I say something like I'm a great poet, I'm a great writer, or that Vincetti Brothers was the greatest novel that I thought had been written to that point, and that I think the greatest book ever written or the greatest piece of art ever conceived is going to be this Norwegian when you read it. Well, I'm just rendering unto to Schneider what is Schneider's. I'll be the first to admit that I didn't come up with that term or I didn't do that. And so that's one of the things when I hear these dumbasses talking about, well, Shakespeare invented the Shakespearean sonnet form. No, you can go back into some of those dusty books and you'll see names from people from the 1400s or the early 1500s, before Shakespeare was born, who had sonnets that were published that were using what's called the Shakespearean form, the 4-4-4-2. But it's mind-boggling, and they'll say, "Oh, well, Shakespeare made up this word." Well, there may not be. First off, there are written proofs of probably about 30 or 40 supposedly coined by Shakespeare words that people have proven. I've seen this online, before, but I'll guarantee you that of the however many thousand or 3,000 words ascribed to him, probably 85% of them were not coined by him. And this isn't me trying to denigrate Shakespeare. It's just he would have had a great ear for what was in the air at the time in his best works. And and that's just natural. I have a great ear for what was the late 20th, early 21st century. There are things that I will have made up that come from my great ability to put words together. But I'm not going to take credit for that I didn't do.
A lot of this also shows how you take these cultural ephemera and kind of like lost treasures, put them in a jigsaw puzzle that will work into art. That's kind of an underrated technique. Some artists are very uh, insecure and will only write things that they've written themselves instead of grasping from other things and kind of forming it. That Ninth Murder poem, you use a phrase that Carl Sagan often used, and you use it in a murder poem
Mm.
rather than a scientific poem. So you use something that would otherwise be a cliche, but just based on the theme does not become cliche.
Well,
I want to mention.
oh, well,
Sorry,
hold on. One
go
thing I
on.
want to say, when it comes to critics too, and especially I was thinking about politics and the Vincetti brothers. I think one of the reasons that critics are sort of bad and they don't want to consider something great is if you see a great athlete, if you see like Kobe Bryant just retired in basketball, if you see what's his name, Peyton Manning in football after his Super Bowl win, um, it's easy to look at these kinds of athletes and say, oh, I can understand why this person is great. He's got a great physique. He can throw the ball far. He can throw a 105-mile-an-hour pitch. He can shoot a basketball from 50, 60 feet like Stephen Curry. But so it's obvious there. And so there's no fear in wondering how they did it. Oh, I just have to. They're born with a certain talent and they work hard. It's very explicable to know why a great athlete is a great athlete. It's far more difficult to understand why a great artist is a great artist. And people, because they can't get that immediate hook, there's fear because it's unknown. Ooh, is this person channeling something from God? No, but they can't understand that, and this induces fear into them. So
You
anyway, I
did
just
an
wanted to,
interview on Conscious that where it was briefly spoken about the idea of receptors, kind of how the cosmos, the brain is kind of a
yeah,
receptor to the rest of the cosmos. There's nothing, and this is why people don't get it because they only look at the surface of things in general. Peyton Manning may be a great football player, but that's obvious. It can be shown and seen in visual. There's no receptor out there that people are going to see that see Dan Schneider's mind is connected to this distant galaxy and calling information from it.
mm,
There's nothing that obvious. So people just go to the PC answer of all things are equal.
yeah, and again, that is so diminishing of the accomplishment because as great an athlete as Babe Ruth, Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, whatever you want to say, I actually think Mario Lemieux was a greater player than Gretzky, but as great as they may have been, uh, it's at a level that's it's just at a physical level. I was talking with that conscious guy about the difference between the physical world and something underneath, and I'm basically a materialist philosophically about the cosmos, but I think great intellect stems from material interactions, generally speaking. But I could be wrong. But it is a more mysterious thing, and people want to back away from it, and people want to ascribe it to gods or inspiration or this, that, or the other thing, and it's so diminishing of the human accomplishment because I can
It's that
tell.
whole idea of how the mind can contain the cosmos, which Emily Dickinson stated in one of her poems,
Yeah.
but the cosmos cannot contain the mind because the mind can contain both and expand outward from it.
And I can
That
t-
is something that is very difficult to perceive for average folk.
And I can tell you, in pro basketball, they've been talking about Michael Jordan recently because the Golden State Warriors. I don't know if you follow basketball up in Canada. The Golden State Warriors are just one win away from breaking Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls record as the most wins in a pro basketball season. The Bulls went 72-10. The Warriors are 72-9. If they go 73-9, they'll be the greatest regular season team in history. Now, Stephen Curry probably overall is not as great a basketball player as Michael Jordan was at his peak. Who knows what he'll be at the end of his career? But people have defaulted and always said Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player that ever lived. No, he wasn't. Will Chamberlain was a greater basketball player. I would argue that LeBron James currently is a greater overall basketball player, and there's probably 3 or 4 other people like Oscar Robertson, names you probably don't know who are greater. But because Jordan came of age in the marketing era of sneakers in the 80s, he's been given that. I'd even put Magic Johnson as a greater basketball player than Michael Jordan. But I can tell you, Michael Jordan had, I believe, from 1984 to 91 when he first, no, 93 when he first retired, 9 years, and then he played 5 or 6. So he had a basketball career that spanned probably, I think, 14 and a half seasons. Let's just say 15. And there's no doubt about it. He worked his ass off, and whatnot. But I can tell you, take any 15-year period of my writing career from the time I became great, from when I was 28 to now 51. So from 28 to 42, 29 to 43, 30 to 44, etc., etc. The output of work, the burning of calories needed by my mind far surpasses anything that Jordan ever did. It has to necessarily, because thinking, putting art together, putting ideas together in ways that are great, that will stand the testimony of time, is a far greater achievement than anything that sports can achieve. You look back at Babe Ruth 100 years ago, and he's just, and people can write reverently of Babe Ruth, but very few people are alive now that Babe Ruth was a significant part of their culture. And in another 50 years, Babe Ruth will be just statistics. Same thing with Michael Jordan. Someone in 100 years isn't going to give a shit about Michael Jordan's basketball career. He'll just be a statistic. Oh, this was a great player from the late 20th century. But my poems will still be relevant. My great novels will be relevant. My
And
essays will be
no
relevant.
one will be no one will be tearing from reading a baseball or basketball statistic, but they will from a great sonnet from John Donne,
Yeah.
or they will from a great poem by Wallace Stevens, or they'll link a memory of theirs if they read something from Hart Crane. This is the whole idea of meaning in the human species and what we bring to it. It may be a great accomplishment of the statistics that sports heroes get from, or Olympians, or what have you, but they don't really have any long-term meaning to it. They may be great at what they do, yes, but a great artist or even a great scientist is going to push the posterity further, and they're going to give more meaning to it. Scientists will discover things that this generation doesn't know that will help future generations, and artists will translate those things and give it more meaning to its readers or its watchers.
And it's like I said the last time we spoke, I believe. If you go back to 1819, Whitman and Melville were both born that year. They died within a year of each other. I think Melville died first. But go to 1819. Who is the richest man in America? Even if you could name it, who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? Who is the most popular celebrity? Some traveling actress, in some, forerunner to vaudeville. No one cares. Who is the greatest American composer then? The song, they weren't even composing music back then in America. So I mean, anyway.
Even in terms of the sciences, Albert Einstein is often posited in a critical cribbing fashion as the greatest scientist that has ever lived.
The greatest mind. The greatest mind.
Yeah, the greatest mind, period. But I would disagree. He's certainly a great scientist. He contributed different ideas, but there were several physicists in Copenhagen and otherwise that had similar ideas to Albert Einstein. There were also more important figures like James Hutton and Darwin and Wallace that came up with more seminal ideas rather than his relativity may be important, but doesn't help us really understand anything more. And even now, they're poking holes through his ideas. So he may be a great mind, but at the same time, scientists become a statistic in a similar fashion. They don't have anything of import to relate to future generations. I'm surprised that Lauren Isley hasn't grown in stature more as the years have went on, because he was a scientist who also had a great artistic mind and was able to translate great ideas onto the public as well.
Because they're idiots, and like I said in the last time we spoke, someone will probably have to boost me up. It'll take someone with some quasi sort of celebrity who will boost me up, or maybe you, if you're writing, and then you'll get that patina of credibility, and you'll say, well, my writing, or the great novels, the great trilogy that I wrote was influenced by Dan Schneider's True Life, or by my New York Quartet. And well, who is Schneider? And then Schneider, because of that. Well, Schneider promoted Lauren Isley and James Emanuel, and then they'll eventually get their due because of some guy who became famous for fucking his chick on some
It
video
often
on the
it
moons of
often is
Saturn.
disheartening though to see, because you wonder if Lauren Isley is out of fashion, how many others have also fallen similar fates. Because here is one of the greatest English prose writers in history, and yet he still hasn't got his due decades later. I mean, he was more popular in his day than he was then. He's kind of done the inverse of most other trajectories, where Herman Melville went and was obscure in his day and then got big later on in the 20th century.